Hello there, welcome to Fridays at Noon. I'm Michael Chen, the executive producer and director for this talk show series. Fridays at Noon is a bi-weekly lunch and learn series that offers education on professional development topics to the University of Denver employees. For more information and to view past videos, please visit du.edu/HR and click on the People Development link. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the rest of the show.
And bring your lunch.
And bring your lunch.
Welcome to Fridays at Noon. My name is Ken Pennock. I'm the Director of People Development, and with me is Greg Giesen, our Manager of People Development. And today we're going to be talking about a resource and service we have, which is the 360, Manager 360 assessment process. And really we're looking that when we talk about the 360, you're going to describe it, really we'll go through how it works and what it is. But it was a very interesting history about this kind of assessment. It actually was first noted in World War II. The German military used it for assessing the performance of their officers. I also noted the first recorded or documented firm that used this in an organization was in the early 1950s, an engineering firm. So the roots of this really follow along organizational development and that kind of thing. And now it's estimated about a third of all companies within the U.S. do some form of this kind of assessment. And so it's exciting that we at DU now and in people development, we have resources for our staff. So I'm again welcome. Anxious to learn about it. So what is it? We hear different names for it, but what is 360 assessment?
Well, if I was just going to summarize it really quickly, I'd say, here you are, and then around the 360 means all the people around you that you impact would be giving you feedback along with your own self-assessment. So that's why it's 360, because it's everybody around you.
Okay. So, and those could be, like, who might be?
Well, as we'll get into, but it will be, everything from direct reports to your manager to peers to, significant people around the university that you impact a lot.
Okay. Yeah, and what's the primary purpose for this kind of assessment, or when you're asked about it? What are people looking to do?
And there's really a number of key purposes. First off, of course, it's just to get, like if you're for the manager, to get feedback on the people you impact the most, because that's your primary clientele. It's to compare how you see yourself in relation to how other people see you, which I would say is probably the most significant component of these, because you can tell from that whether you're in alignment with how people see you, and also if you have the self-awareness at the same level as other people do. It draws out your strengths and weaknesses, because every manager will say, well, these are my strengths and these are my weaknesses, but it's one thing to have a self-perception, it's another thing to have a self-perception based on the people that you impact, and so it's much more powerful. It's an opportunity to get coaching in our program, which we'll talk about more in depth. But here's the thing, with any kind of corporate coaching program, in most cases, every coach will start with a 360 so they have some tangible data points to work with a particular manager. So that's where the coaching component comes in. Talk about professional development goals. I can't think of a better way if you're a manager to really know what your professional development goals are by having that kind of data to be able to utilize to then create it, because then it's much more accurate. It also creates, I know there's a lot of these, but it's significant, is one of the ultimate goals in a particular department or team or unit would be to create a culture of feedback. What I mean by that is where feedback is going both ways, not only the traditional top-down, but bottom-up. And this kind of helps create that, and it also creates people to have a mindset where feedback is a positive experience, through this process. Also, it gives the manager a chance to role model effective, feedback going both ways, and self-improvement, because that's really what they're demonstrating. And I guess lastly on this part, I would say, it also provides an opportunity for a manager to walk the talk versus talk the talk. Talk the talk.
Right.
Oh yeah, we do this and we do that, but walk the talk is really putting the pedal to the metal. And then lastly, I would say as far as the employee goes, it's an opportunity to provide upward feedback, which very rarely happens, and it needs to be an integral part. It's an opportunity to manage up.
Yeah, and it's a safe way to do this as well.
Well, and hopefully it's a safe way to do it as well, and that's why the coaching part.
Right.
And the employee has a responsibility to create a culture of feedback as well as the manager. So this also contributes to that piece.
And I do want to clarify that we're not talking about the annual more traditional performance review. This is a very different process and tool. So,
and not only that, on that note, we would recommend that you don't do a Manager 360 near the same time frame that you would do before. That they should be totally separate pieces.
I agree. Well, then, so how does the process work?
Well, very simply, and again, this is our process, so it's not everybody's process, but, it starts with a commitment to do it, and then to let us know that they want to do it. And that's really when the coaching kicks in, is right off from that commitment point. Then, and we do provide some coaching into how to set it up and how to do it and what the process is going to be. Then you select an evaluation team. We're calling it an evaluation team versus evaluators because they're all together are kind of supporting you in your growth and development if you're a manager. So it's selecting the team, then it's confirming with people, and we'll get into more details as we go on. Then there's taking the actual assessment itself, which we give 2 weeks, for people to take it. Then there's reviewing the results with a coach. And then the next step after that is then summarizing the results and going back to the evaluation team. Also meeting with your manager, the manager's manager, who we'll talk more about that, but they also get a copy of the results. And then after those meetings, it's creating an action plan based on the additional feedback that you got verbally after you've got the results, and putting an action plan together and then sharing the action plan. That's the full cycle of this process.
So it's in depth, but sounds very deliberate, very clear cut as
very
well.
much.
So then we talk about upward feedback. Who actually evaluates a manager?
As I mentioned before, self-evaluation, critical piece. And then, of course, your direct reports. Then your peers in the department or peers outside the department. Then there's your manager. And then there's other key stakeholders that you typically would have impact over or with.
Okay. So it isn't, again, just the the subordinate or the employee doing it. They're really getting data, again, from a number of points. So is there an ideal number of people that are typically included or and that you have found to be kind of the optimal?
Yeah, I would say minimum of 8, maximum of 16. Now, granted, you can go over 16, but then it gets more and more, there's more meetings, more complicated, but it's certainly doable. So 12 right in the middle, between 8 and 16 is probably an ideal number.
And the team members, they don't see data that each of them provided about the person being assessed.
Right, and we'll get more into that, but yeah, it's definitely separate.
So what if a team only had 2 members? Or they're a very small group?
Yeah, realistically, unless there was a lot of peers or, other stakeholders that could come to 8 plus people, it still might be doable. But I think the reality is if you have a small team, they should be coming to us and we can kind of customize a team building that's centered around feedback. For a group that small, I don't see a lot of value in taking an assessment. Also, the less people, the more there's a tendency to try and guess, who might be scoring you a certain way. So I would probably discourage that.
So with this particular tool assessment that we have now available, where did the questions come from? How did you come up with them?
Yeah, well, I've been doing 360 coaching for probably about 25 years. And almost every possible instrument out there. And I actually found the ones that worked the best were the customized ones. The ones, when I say customized, the ones that whatever company I was working with, we created questions for that culture, versus off-the-shelf assessment, which I know a lot of people like. So I thought it'd be better for DU to create one that was more generic management type of questions, and that's really kind of how it was designed. And so all the questions would be questions that would be relevant to anybody that was managing people in general. So I took the best of the questions, what I thought, and then I changed the wording so it was more, obviously I wasn't plagiarizing, and then put together what I think are probably, the questions we have will give you everything you need to know from A to Z about how somebody's managing.
Yeah, that's, do you have some examples of what some of the questions might look like?
Actually, funny you should say that. On our website, we have two things. Here's what a sample report would look like, and this is on the website. And you can just kind of see, this is kind of how the results look. And the different categories you can see are based on the different groupings of people that filled it out, from direct reports to self-report. And then we also provide this on our website, and it walks through the whole process that we're talking about today. So people can print it out so you know what you're getting into.
Yeah.
But some of the questions, I'll just rattle off a few. For example, we break it up into categories. So there's communication, there's conflict, there's decision making, there's motivation, there's organizational skills, there's teamwork. And I'm just scratching the surface on some of these. But an example would be, and the questions are done on a Likert scale. So it's like where you would score it as strongly agree, neither agree or disagree, then disagree, and strongly disagree, right? So those are the scales.
Yeah.
So for example, sets realistic expectations and clear direction. That'd be a question. Another one, and these are all from different categories. Role models the behavior he or she expects to see in others. Because obviously if you're saying one thing but you're not role modeling it, that would be good feedback to get. Responds calmly and constructively when mistakes are made. Solicits suggestions and opinions of others when making decisions. Knows how to motivate others. Brings people together successfully around projects and tasks. And again, I'm just scratching the surface. Provides timely feedback to team members both on strength and growth areas. And then focuses on growing and developing each member. The thing I want to emphasize is that 62 out of the 64 questions are all Likert scale questions, right? There's only 2 open-ended questions where people would actually write a response. And they are, what strengths stand out the most for this person as a manager? And then what could this person do to increase his or her effectiveness? So we wanted to really set a constructive question that focused on even the growth areas, as you can see, are worded in a positive ways. Like what do they need to do more of instead of what's wrong with this person?
And so it really it has a positive tone, which also reinforces that it is not as intimidating as it might first appear to some people about doing it.
Exactly.
Well, now, can these questions be customized? I mean, how much can they be customized, or are they pretty static?
Because the way we designed it was such that all the generic, typical questions about management are in the assessment. It is possible to customize, but it's much more trickier because then we have to get into the software of the instrument and all these things. And so what we're recommending is that you use the assessment for all your basic questions, and then as in the process, when you meet with people after the assessment results are in, that's when you ask the customized questions. And you can use your own. That way it's much easier, it's more effective, and then you've already developed a rapport. So that's how we're recommending it.
And then you can really dig into areas of particular note.
Yeah, because if we tried to customize every one of these, it would slow down the process greatly. And I don't think that's necessary. I think that's something you can do face to face.
So, how the practical. So how long does this take, have you found, typically, for someone to go through and complete the questionnaire?
Probably 20 minutes. I mean, because most of the questions, you can pretty much rattle off. The questions are in here, so you can see ahead of time. But it's the 2 open-ended questions, probably where you really have to put some thought into.
Okay. So then, as a manager, So if I was going to have you guys do this of me, how would I decide? Because I know you give me awesome feedback. So how would I decide who to evaluate me?
Well, if possible, you want to have all your direct reports in. Now, if you have 20 direct reports, obviously that's not going to be possible.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to, because you want, with the 360 concept, you know your manager, you know you're doing one no matter what. You know you want at least 2 peers, if not more, 2 to 3 peers.
Mm-hmm.
Your direct reports, and then whatever you have left to get to, whether it's 12 or 16, then you look at key stakeholders. So you would kind of put that list together, but the way we designed it is that you don't get final say. If you're the manager, you don't get final say. Your boss has to sign off on, your manager has to sign off on your list.
Right.
And the reason for that is because sometimes a manager might pick the people that they know will score them, that they have the best relationships with.
Right.
And that skews the results. And we would really encourage people, and that's why we have coaching.
Mm-hmm.
But, to pick the people that are going to give you the most effective feedback.
And with this kind of a task intervention, if you will, what I often hear the most about this and any kind of assessment, is it anonymous?
Yeah.
Is it confidential
Yeah.
and such?
Yeah, and here's the thing. No names are ever transferred to the results.
Mm-hmm.
So as you get your results, what you're going to see is your direct reports score. You're going to see them in categories, right? The total of your direct reports, the total of your peers, the total of those kind of things. So those are all going to be more of rankings.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to be pretty generic. You won't be able to tell anything other than kind of what the breakdown is of those subgroups. Now, the last 2 questions that are open-ended, I suppose if you wanted to really, if somebody brought up an example and you knew that there was only one person that knew that example, you could probably narrow it down that way. But that's again why we have coaching, because obviously the coaching is focused on the message, not the messenger.
Right.
And so I don't think, rarely is that ever a problem, but because we're coaching them, they quickly don't get caught up in that, because if you were then really taking it in the wrong mindset anyways.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good. I mean, I know that's always a concern. And, when you were referencing the number of direct reports, that 8 to 12 in total, that fits very well with with the campus, because that's a pretty typical manager-employee ratio. So that would fit well. What about retribution or reaction against someone?
And it's everybody's fear, I think, especially if they have maybe a tense relationship with their manager, and then they're filling it out and they're like, there's a trust issue of what's going to happen to this. But again, because we have coaching, throughout, that kind of helps with that one. And also, a part of our coaching would be, if you're trying to create a culture of open, two-way feedback, the easiest way to destroy that would be in any way, to have a sense of retribution, because if a manager got slammed, let's say, in their score, to me that's a good thing. It's a good thing because wouldn't you rather know that and be able to kind of turn this around versus have that as an existing part of the culture?
Yeah.
So, we're going to coach them obviously away from that. And really encourage employees to be fully open and honest, because it's the only way somebody can improve is if they actually hear the feedback, and that's part of our job is to help them do that.
And again, that's a major driver for firms using these, because it is a way to get this feedback in a very structured way. So what if my manager could really benefit from something like this, but she doesn't think she needs it?
Yeah. And that's fairly common. Like, a lot of the employees want their managers to take the 360. And really,
please take it.
I think that in itself is feedback, right? Because it's like, clearly it's one-sided, or at least our perception is it's one-sided feedback. The thing about a 360, and I know a lot of people get nervous because you're being evaluated, right? So you're kind of on edge about it.
Yeah.
The 360's got to be seen as a get-to, not a have-to. And that's, again, where the coaching comes in for people that welcome the feedback because they want to improve and develop.
Right.
But we can't force somebody to take the 360. But what we can try and do slowly through this process is create a whole culture, DU culture, of where feedback is wanted, and people are seeking it out, and it's done in a positive, constructive way. So for those managers that are hesitant to do it, it might take them a little bit of time, but the more and more we can get these out and create that culture, I think more and more people are going to see it as a positive. It can also be a great performance goal for a manager or a manager's manager to pass down to all the managers to do it in a year. Many departments are doing that already. That way it's kind of an expectation.
You've mentioned coaching a number of different places, and that it's required. What does that look like, and why is it so important?
Part of the reason it's critical is from being a coach for many years, many organizations I've worked with already did the 360, and how they did it was an off-the-shelf. Everybody got it, everybody took it, they passed it out to each other to take it, and then they took their results, went in their office, closed the door, looked through it, put it in a file, never said a word to the staff, never said a word to anybody else, because there was nobody holding the process together. And that's the biggest problem with these 360s. So that's why coaching is mandatory, so that you not only have to face the results, but you've got to work through it and then work with the people that filled it out, which is what people will be hesitant to do. And that's why the coaching is so important. And how it works is, as I mentioned, we start right at the very beginning with them before they even take it and pass it out. We coach them all the way to the end when they're creating the action plan, which is a very specific 2 or 3 things I'm going to work on from this point forward. To get to that point, that's where the coaching is going to be a part of throughout the whole thing.
And I could see that role of the coach also would be a support. So if people do have concerns or they're struggling in those meetings, they would have the coach to lean on.
Exactly.
So how would you go about asking someone to be on your feedback team?
Well, in the booklet, we do spell it out. We provide examples. For me, what I would say is probably a 2-step process. The first step would be a generic email to the whole department, even if you have more people than that can take the assessment. Here's what I'm doing. I'm going to be asking some of you, just to give them a heads up. Part 1. Part 2, I think it's important to, what I would recommend is a face-to-face. It's really be important. If I could get your feedback, can I count on you to do it? Because then they'll be more inclined to complete it, and they think it's meaningful to you because you said it that way. Here's what you don't do, which I've seen way too many times, is a generic email. You will be taking this, and you need to complete it by where it becomes a have to instead of a get to. And people right away have a reaction, and I guarantee you it's going to play out in the results. And then the second thing you don't want to do, which I've seen many CEOs do, is they tell their administrative assistant, pass this out and tell people to sign up. They don't even do it. There's no communication. It's passed down to somebody to then pass it down. And right there's a red flag from the very beginning. And again, it goes back to that's why we have coaching, because we wouldn't let that fly if we were coaching.
Well, and you lose the modeling that you referred to of someone being authentic and open.
You're already 2 strikes at the plate, and they haven't filled it out yet.
Well, what if the staff is too big? Too large for everyone to take it.
And that does happen. And kind of what I alluded to earlier is, so they still need to be involved. So in other words, they're part of the general email, even though they may not be on the evaluation team itself. When you get the results done and you meet with people, they would be incorporated into that after meeting, because you're really just sharing a summary of your results, and you're asking for more feedback. Because part of that after feedback meeting is to really walk the talk by saying, here's what I heard, I need more data, can you guys give me examples, and will you hold me accountable? And yet you go back to them again a third time, which would be everybody, even though they didn't all fill it out, and say, here are the, here's my action plan, here are the 2 or 3 things I need you guys to support me, and if you see me falling off, please give me feedback and I'll do the same. If those pieces aren't in place, I guarantee you that this will just be a memory in about a month.
Well, and this is really following, proven methodology around surveys as well. So people who have done climate surveys, engagement surveys, and this is more personally focused, but very similar process.
And it's kind of scary because not only are you getting the results, but now you got to summarize it. Now you got to go back to the people, and then you got to go back one more time in the summary fashion. I mean, it feels like a lot of work, but the truth is, if you want it to be impactful and effective and actually change the culture and yourself and the relationships and create a culture of feedback, this is what it takes.
You got good courage, but it sends a very powerful message as well. Is there any preparation that people should be aware of as they're? I mean, I know we have a number of units on campus that are actively considering this now. What kinds of things would be required to do this?
You know, some of the preparation, again, it's all in this booklet, you know, that's on the website. Some self-reflection first, kind of anticipation of, you know, from working out who's going to be on my team, my evaluation team, to what do I already kind of know about myself, my strengths, weaknesses, what can I anticipate? There's that kind of thing. And there's just getting mentally prepared to, you know, to pass it out and to get the feedback and to go through the process and to role model this. You know, a lot of it, it's kind of like giving a big speech, you know, where you're kind of psyching yourself up and you're getting ready and there's nervous butterflies and yet you just, you know, show up. And that, again, is why the coaching is so important with all that.
As a quick aside, are people typically surprised by the results? And you might be getting into this in a bit, but is it often more affirming of what we have a pretty good idea about, or are there times where they're genuinely had a blind spot, as we all do in areas?
I can only base it on my experience in coaching these, but I'd say about 25% are very surprised, which, and we'll get more into kind of what that means, but and then you can break it down to probably the average person. There's maybe 2 or 3 questions that there were surprises within those results, but the general results weren't.
Okay.
So, you know, it kind of falls along those lines.
And who gets a copy of these results, actually?
There's 3 copies. One goes to the manager, one goes to the coach, one goes to the manager's manager. Okay. And keep in mind, when you take this, you can, because you only have one manager, right? In 90% of the cases, you can see exactly how your manager scored you in each question. That is right there on the results.
So that one.
So it makes for a very interesting conversation because, you know, it's spelled out. It's right there.
Yeah. Can't hide as much from that one. You know, with respect to these results, what does it say if the manager's direct reports scored the manager lower than perhaps, you know, I scored myself?
Yeah. Sometimes it's a rude awakening. To me, what it usually says is there's a significant difference between intent and impact. In other words, it's not necessarily a reflection of the manager's intent. It might be in the right place. But what that gap is showing is that there is a gap between the intent and the impact. And so that's where the coaching is probably going to take place.
The flip of that, what if the manager scores themselves?
Yeah.
Many people are pretty hard on themselves, and how do you work with them in that instance?
Well, see, that's I think you just said it. In some cases, it's showing that some managers are perfectionistic, you know, like they expect the highest of themselves, but they're also hardest on themselves. And sometimes you can kind of see that if they're scoring themselves consistently lower than everybody else. It could be a self-esteem issue as well, but what it is showing is there's still a disconnect there. There's still that gap that would have to be explored, and it might just mean that they're either not giving themselves enough credit, or that they're maybe just too hard on themselves, and that in itself would be a coaching point because obviously you'd want to kind of even the scales up a little bit.
Well, now here's a tongue twister. What about when the manager scores are lower than everyone else?
Yeah, you know what's interesting in that is if the manager scores are consistently low, and I just saw this recently actually, a couple of weeks ago with one of my clients here at DU, but everybody else was kind of in alignment, because that's what you're looking for, is the alignment to see how well your self-perception is with people you impact. what it shows is there's a disconnect between the manager's manager and the manager and the whole situation. And what that ultimately says, it probably has more feedback for the manager's manager about them versus about the situation because they're not as in tune with what's actually going on.
Yeah, interesting. So, is there one of these tools for non-managers or for employees?
Yeah, we currently haven't created it yet. That would be a peer-to-peer. But the one thing I want to say about peer-to-peer, though, is you definitely have to have a mature workforce that's actually able to give each other open and honest feedback. If you have a revolving, like you continuously have new employees, I wouldn't recommend doing that because you haven't built up the relationship maturity level to be able to do that. Sounds good, but you have to have some consistency, I think, at least in the core group of employees to do that. So that's where I would recommend more of a team building based around feedback. I think that's more effective than something like this.
Plus, they don't necessarily know you. I mean, they wouldn't know you as opposed to someone who you've worked with 9 or 12 months.
And it almost would require coaching on how to do the feedback because sometimes some employees, if they have an adverse relationship, might see it as an opportunity to anonymously take a shot at somebody. Right. And that's why I mean by a mature force, because that would be an immature move, and we would really want to create more of a mature one. So I would really steer away from that. Now, we might create an assessment that's much simpler and easier to use that could be used, and they are out there on the shelf somewhere. You can buy them, but we haven't gotten there yet.
Well, I think as we get close to wrapping here, what if someone's interested? What's the first step? I mean, I'm really excited about this resource coming from People Development and HR. I know we're getting more and more queries. So what's the first step if people are curious?
First step is go to the website and download both of these, so they can at least see the steps, know what they're getting into. Then the second step would be the commitment piece, is make sure their supervisor is in alignment, thinks it's good, and then they contact us, and then we go from there.
So pretty straightforward, really.
Yeah, pretty straightforward.
And we also, so people know there are no costs other than time with this, that the HR department covers any expenses.
Yes.
So, well, this has been very helpful. Is there anything else you might, just to final words on this?
I say it's nothing to be afraid of. It's something to dive into, and it's, can only make somebody a better manager. And so I would encourage people to do it.
So call us.
Call us.
But thank you. We appreciate talking with you at Fridays at noon.